It started with the lightest touch, her hand on my shoulder, lingering just long enough to make me wonder if she even realized what it meant. But from that moment on, nothing between us felt the same. I've always believed that in life, the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. You can hear someone's laugh across the room and feel your whole day lift. You can catch the way someone looks at you and suddenly, you're aware of yourself in a way you weren't before. And sometimes, it's just a hand, resting on your shoulder, staying there longer than it should. That night, the office was nearly empty. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only steady sound, paired with the quiet tapping of my keyboard. I had been staring at spreadsheets far too long, the kind of work that drains your spirit without you realizing it. Then I felt it, warmth pressing lightly through the fabric of my shirt. A palm, gentle but steady. I didn't even need to turn to know it was her. The secretary. She had been with the company for years, the kind of woman everyone relied on without saying it out loud. In her early 40s, she carried herself with a grace that came from experience, not just confidence. Every detail about her was composed. Her neat hair swept back, her fitted blazer, the subtle perfume that followed her like a whisper. She had this calm presence that made you straighten up without her asking. But in that moment, she wasn't the secretary. She was just a woman standing beside me, her palm resting on my shoulder. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt like I didn't want her to move it. I kept my eyes on the screen, though I couldn't focus on the numbers anymore. Her hand was light, almost casual, but there was something in the way she let it stay there. Not rushed, not fleeting. Just there. I could feel my body reacting before my mind did. Shoulders tightening, heartbeat picking up, every nerve under her palm suddenly awake. And yet, I didn't want her to let go. It was the kind of touch that spoke more than words dared to. "You've been at it for hours," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth her hand already implied. "You should take a break." I nodded, but my throat caught when I tried to answer. Her tone was simple, but the gentleness behind it pulled me in. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even advice. It was concern. Real concern. And from her, that meant something. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at her. She was looking at the screen, not me, as if deliberately keeping the moment safe from direct acknowledgement. But her lips curved in a faint smile, and the corners of her eyes softened in a way I hadn't noticed before. Finally, she lifted her hand. I almost sighed from the absence, though I caught myself before I did. The warmth lingered like an echo, and that's when it struck me. How one simple gesture could feel like the beginning of something I wasn't supposed to imagine. Something that had no name yet, but pulsed in the air between us, waiting to be discovered. After that first touch, I found myself paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. The office after hours had its own kind of silence, different from the quiet of the day. During daylight, silence carried the weight of deadlines and unspoken pressure. At night, though, when the others were gone and only a few lights remained, the silence felt intimate, like the walls themselves were willing to listen. She lingered again that night. I'd expected her to gather her things and leave, but instead, she leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing her arms in a way that looked casual, though I knew it wasn't. "You work too much," she said, tilting her head as if she were studying me. Her voice was soft, but firm enough to suggest she was used to being right. I smiled faintly, keeping my eyes on the spreadsheet just to steady myself. "And you don't," she chuckled, a low, warm sound that carried in the stillness. "I've been doing this long enough to know when to stop. You're still trying to prove yourself." I glanced up, and for a moment, I forgot about the numbers glowing on the screen. The way she said it, without judgment, without dismissal, made it sound like she'd been exactly where I was once. Like she could see the weight I was carrying because she had carried it too. Her bracelets gave a soft clink when she shifted her arms. The sound was small, but it made me look at her hands, elegant and steady. The kind of hands that had been through years of work, yet still moved with grace. "You've got ambition," she added, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not in criticism but in thought. "That's good. Just don't let it burn you out before it gets you anywhere." There was something disarming about the way she said it. She wasn't trying to lecture me. She was sharing. And in that moment, I realized that most people my age would have shrugged off advice like that, maybe even bristled against it. But from her, I wanted to hear more. "You talk like you've already lived 2 lives," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop myself. She laughed again, softer this time, looking down at the floor. "Some days, it feels like I have." The desk lamp glowed between us, throwing gentle shadows across her face. I noticed the lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, lines that didn't take away from her beauty, but deepened it. They told stories, held memories, and made her seem more real than anyone else in the building. We talked for longer than I expected. Little things at first, the endless stream of emails, the way the coffee machine seemed to groan like an old man, the absurdity of office politics. But somewhere between her laughter and her pauses, I began to feel the invisible shift. She wasn't just the secretary. She was a woman who carried her life quietly, like a secret she only let slip when someone was willing to really listen. And that night, she let me listen. The following week, the office was quiet again, as it often was when the clock ticked past 8. I'd gotten used to those hours, the glow of the desk lamp, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the way the world outside felt distant, almost non-existent. She was there too, not hovering, not intruding, just present, moving between the filing cabinet and her own desk, checking things, tying up loose ends. And every time I glanced up, I noticed how naturally she filled the space. At one point, she came over to help me with some paperwork I couldn't quite untangle. She leaned over my desk, pointing at the document, her perfume faint but distinct, something floral, softened by time. "Not here," she murmured, tapping the page with a neatly manicured finger. "Here. This is where the mistake is." I followed her hand, tracing the words on the page. But then it happened again. The same gesture that had been haunting me since that first night. Her palm, settling on my shoulder. It seemed so natural, the way she did it, like it was nothing more than steadying herself as she leaned closer. But this time, I couldn't ignore the way her hand stayed, the way her fingers adjusted slightly against the fabric of my shirt, pressing just enough to remind me she was there. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't obvious. But it was intentional. Or at least it felt that way to me. I froze, my pen caught in midair. The silence of the office suddenly magnified, papers rustling, the faint creak of the chair as I shifted under her touch. My chest tightened, not in panic, but in something far more dangerous. She didn't move her hand quickly this time. She let it rest, like an unspoken promise. My pulse thudded against the back of my throat, and I wondered if she could feel it through the tension in my shoulder. I looked up, trying to catch her expression, but her face was angled toward the paper, her voice calm as she explained the correction. If she felt the same awareness I did, she didn't show it. But the longer her hand stayed there, the more impossible it became to treat it as casual. I wanted to say something, anything, but what words could possibly acknowledge what I was feeling without breaking the fragile balance between us? If I called attention to it, would she withdraw? Pretend it meant nothing? Or worse, would she remind me it was nothing? So I stayed silent. I let the moment linger, the warmth of her palm burning its way deeper into my thoughts than I wanted to admit. Finally, when she withdrew her hand, it felt like a loss. Not a relief. A loss. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about kindness anymore. It wasn't just her being supportive or guiding me through the paperwork. Something had shifted. Something neither of us dared to name. And the scariest part was, I didn't want to stop it. It became a habit, almost without me realizing it. Waiting for her at the end of the day. The office would empty, the chatter and footsteps fading until only a handful of us remained. And then, when I noticed her slipping her files into her bag or switching off her desk lamp, I would rise too, timing it so we left together. That evening, the air outside was cooler than expected. The kind of night where the city felt quieter, the street lamps humming faintly, stretching pools of amber light across the pavement. I offered to walk her to her car, and she didn't protest, just gave me that small, knowing smile of hers, like she was indulging me. The building door clicked shut behind us, and suddenly it was just the two of us in the quiet street. Her heels tapped softly against the concrete, the rhythm measured and steady. I matched my pace with hers, trying not to look as if I was too aware of her presence, though every step beside her made me more conscious of the difference between us. Her poise, her calm, the way she seemed entirely comfortable in her own skin. Halfway down the block, the sidewalk shifted unevenly. She hesitated for a moment, then slipped her hand through my arm. It was such a natural gesture, effortless, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. But for me, it was everything. Her fingers curled lightly around my sleeve, steadying herself, though she didn't let go even after the ground evened out. My arm stiffened at first, surprised by the contact. But then I relaxed, letting her hand rest there as if it belonged. The warmth of her skin seeped through the thin fabric of my shirt. I could feel the faint pressure of her grip with each step, her presence anchored to mine. It was a simple thing, almost nothing at all. And yet I couldn't stop replaying it in my head even as it was happening. "You make this place feel safer," she said suddenly, her voice quiet, almost to herself. I glanced at her, unsure if she meant the office, or this moment, or me. But the way she looked up at me, eyes steady, mouth curved just slightly, it felt personal. More than it should have been. For a second, neither of us spoke. The air seemed heavier, filled with the sound of her heels and my heartbeat. She didn't release my arm, and I didn't ask her to. When we reached her car, she finally paused. Her hand slipped away reluctantly, as though she had to remind herself to let go. I felt the absence immediately, a kind of coldness against my sleeve. "Thank you," she said softly, her keys dangling in her hand. I nodded, not trusting my voice. And as she opened her car door, I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. We weren't just colleagues walking out of the same building anymore. That invisible line we'd both been so careful not to cross. It was already behind us. It was her idea to get coffee. Not in the rushed, professional way of grabbing 2 cups between meetings, but in the quieter sense, an invitation. We left the office together on a Saturday morning, when the city moved slower, and found a small cafe tucked into the corner of a side street. The kind of place where time seemed to pause, where the low hum of conversations and the faint hiss of the espresso machine created a cocoon around us. She chose the seat by the window, sunlight brushing across her face as she slipped her blazer off and rested her bag on the chair beside her. Without the office around her, she looked different, softer, more herself. For a while, we talked about little things, the weather, the cafe's mismatched mugs, the oddities of the week. But eventually, her smile dimmed just slightly, and her eyes shifted to the steam rising from her cup. "Do you know what it feels like?" she began slowly, stirring her coffee with deliberate care. "To give years of your life to something, and still feel invisible?" Her words hung between us, heavy. I stayed quiet, waiting. "In this office," she went on, "people see me as reliable, organized, always there to pick up what others drop. But that's it. I'm background, fixture, not someone you notice." She exhaled, the spoon clinking softly against porcelain. "And as I get older, it feels like that's all I'll ever be." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was vulnerable, honest in a way I hadn't expected. And it hit me harder than it should have, because I couldn't imagine anyone overlooking her. "You're not invisible," I said, the words escaping before I could second-guess them. She glanced up at me, surprised by the firmness in my tone. "I notice you," I added, quieter now, almost afraid of how much I meant it. "More than you think." Her lips parted just slightly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, her gaze lingered on me, like she was searching for something. Proof, maybe, or sincerity. I held her eyes, refusing to let the moment dissolve. When I reached for my cup, my hand brushed hers on the table. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't an accident either. Our fingers touched briefly, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The warmth of her skin against mine sent a shiver through me, subtle but undeniable. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her hand stilled beneath mine, as if the weight of the moment held her there. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're kind," she said softly, her voice a little unsteady. But it wasn't kindness, not really. It was something more, something I didn't dare name yet. We sat there, sunlight spilling across the table, the world moving outside the window. And for the first time, she let me see the part of herself that no one else at the office ever did. The part that longed not to be overlooked, but to be truly seen. And I couldn't look away. Back at the office, the days carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. Every time I passed her desk, every time she spoke my name, I felt that undercurrent. Quiet, unspoken, undeniable. That night, it was just the two of us again. The building was nearly empty, save for the distant hum of a vacuum on another floor. She stood beside me as I scrolled through a document, leaning in to point out a correction. Her presence filled the space around me, warm, steady, familiar in a way that was starting to feel dangerous. And then, without ceremony, her palm settled on my shoulder. It wasn't the first time. By now, her touch should have felt routine. But it didn't. Not anymore. This time, I reacted before I could think. I lifted my hand, slowly, hesitantly, and placed it over hers. The world seemed to freeze. Her hand was warm beneath mine, steady but trembling ever so slightly, as if she wasn't expecting me to close that invisible distance. My fingers curved gently, holding hers in place against my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us breathed too deeply, as if any sudden movement would shatter the fragile moment we'd created. I could hear everything. The soft tick of the wall clock, the faint hum of the computer, the low whir of the building's heating system. But louder than all of it was the pounding of my own heartbeat, echoing in my ears. I turned slightly in my chair, just enough to look up at her. Her lips parted, as though words were forming but refusing to leave. Her eyes searched mine, filled with questions she didn't voice. For a long moment, we just stayed like that, my hand holding hers, her hand resting firmly on me, neither willing to break the spell. I wanted to tell her that I'd never felt something so simple cut so deep, that the weight of her hand was enough to anchor me, steady me, pull me into something I wasn't sure either of us was ready to admit. But the words caught in my throat. Finally, she drew in a soft breath. Her hand shifted just slightly under mine, as though testing the boundaries of what was allowed. She didn't pull away, though. Not yet. I leaned into the touch just barely, but enough for her to notice. Her eyes softened, and for a split second, I thought she might close the gap between us entirely. But then reality returned. She blinked, steadied herself, and gently withdrew her hand. Mine slipped away, reluctantly, the warmth fading as quickly as it had come. The moment ended. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Every glance, every breath carried the weight of what we hadn't said, what we couldn't yet say. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing about us could return to what it had been before. The office felt different that night. It wasn't the lights or the quiet or the endless stream of work. It was us. The air carried the memory of every touch, every glance, every silence that had stretched too long to be accidental. She stood by my desk, arms crossed loosely, watching me with that thoughtful expression she wore when she wanted to say something but didn't know how to begin. I closed the last file on my screen and turned the lamp down low. The room softened instantly, shadows stretching across the walls, leaving only the warm circle of light that wrapped around us like a cocoon. For a while, neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing, steady, careful, but not as calm as she wanted me to believe. My own chest felt tight, the words I'd been holding back pressing harder against me with each passing second. Finally, she broke the silence. "I shouldn't feel this way," she whispered, almost as if she were confessing to herself. "But I do." Her voice wavered just enough for me to see the truth behind it. Vulnerability, fear, hope. I stood, moving closer, though careful not to rush. "What way?" I asked, though we both already knew the answer. Her eyes found mine in the dim light, and for once, she didn't look away. "Alive. Like I'm not just existing. You make me feel alive." The words hung in the air, fragile and beautiful, and for a moment I was afraid to breathe, afraid the confession would dissolve if I reached for it. But then I saw her hand tremble slightly at her side, and I knew she meant every syllable. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint shimmer of unshed emotion in her eyes. "I don't care about age," I said softly, firmly. "I don't care about rules or what anyone else might think. The only thing that matters to me is you." Her lips parted, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure. Not because she doubted me, but because she hadn't expected someone to say it out loud. Slowly, she reached up. Her fingers brushed through my hair, tender, deliberate, before settling against my cheek. Her touch was light, but grounding, steady in a way that told me she'd wanted this as much as I had. I leaned into her hand, closing the last of the distance, and she let her forehead rest gently against mine. We stood there in silence, our breaths mingling, neither of us needing more than that. The world outside the office could spin however it wanted. Inside, under the soft glow of the lamp, we had carved out something entirely our own. Her hand stayed on my cheek, warm and certain, and I knew this wasn't fleeting anymore. It wasn't a moment I'd look back on and wonder about. It was the beginning of something real, something neither of us could ignore. And as her eyes closed, a small, contented smile on her lips, I realized I didn't want to. Thank you for listening to this story. If it stayed with you even just a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might feel the same. And tell me in the comments, would you have let her hand stay there too?